Hey, it's Lou, and some wild shit is going down in France, where protesters called the Yellow Vests are entering their second month of demonstrations. Hundreds of thousands of people have participated all across the country, first in the outer provinces and then in major cities where some violence has erupted. The Arc de Triomphe was vandalized. A government building was attacked with a forklift. As of this recording, some 5,000 people have been arrested. Initially, a planned hike in a gasoline tax set off the movement, but it's evolved into a general expression of discontent with the government seen as out of touch. Emmanuel Macron, elected less than 2 years ago in a landslide victory, has fallen out of favor, particularly among the rural working class. No wonder then that some of the targets of the Yellow Vest are symbols of privilege and decadence, like Paris's luxury boutiques.
Some people earn millions of euros just sitting at a desk, whilst we're working 40-hour weeks for a salary of just 1,500 euros.
Even though the Macron administration has made limited concessions to the protesters, the movement continues. So, is the French government broken beyond repair? And can the European Union sustain yet another crisis? For more than 3 decades, France's economy has been stagnant. Unemployment has lingered between 8 and 11%. The cost of living has increased, but wages have not kept pace. Meanwhile, income inequality has grown. In short, by the 2017 presidential election, the status quo wasn't working for the majority of the population, and they were sick and tired of the political parties that failed to improve the situation. Enter into this scene 39-year-old Emmanuel Macron. Macron ran for president without ever having held elected office. He formed a new political party, one that promised to revitalize the economy and make France a player on the world stage once again. Revealingly, his campaign book was titled Revolution. Macron won, nearly doubling the vote total of his opponent. His new political party also dominated in parliamentary elections, earning an outright majority. These overwhelming victories emboldened Macron and his team. They developed a strategy to govern like Jupiter. Jupiter, if you're not up on Roman mythology, is the king of the gods. In other words, Macron thought he was hot shit. And keep in mind, Arthur Goldhammer, senior affiliate at the Center for European Studies at Harvard University, told me the French system already gives the president an unusual amount of power. Perhaps that's why French citizens are so prone to protest. They view it as the only way to influence the executive. And Macron, in particular, felt aloof and inaccessible. Jean-Yves Camus, a political analyst at the French Institute for International and Strategic Affairs, told me Macron surrounded himself with advisors from his privileged social sphere, the type of enviable yuppies who go to elite schools and seem to always have things go their way. In addition, Macron's rhetoric revealed a contempt for the working class. He remarked that many of the people who had been laid off from a meatpacking facility were illiterate. He once told an unemployed gardener that all he had to do to find a job was cross the street. These two statements and several other similarly out-of-touch gaffes seem to imply that the 2.5 million unemployed people in France were lazy and dumb. Combine this condescension with some of Macron's policies, and you'll start to understand why the anti-establishment tide that lifted him to office in the first place began to turn on him, why he earned the nickname President of the Rich. For instance, Macron's reforms made it easier for businesses to fire people. He stripped new railroad workers of long-standing benefits. He continued cuts to municipal budgets for civil services, and he eliminated a tax levied on the top 1%. However, the straw that broke the camel's back, or as the French say, the drop of water that made the vase overflow, was an increase in the gasoline tax. Macron saw this as a measure to discourage people from emitting greenhouse gases, a worthy cause. But politically, it played into this growing rural-urban divide. You can get by in big cities without a car. They are much more walkable. You can hail an Uber. You can rely on the metro. In short, city dwellers won't really feel the gas tax. But it's a different story outside of the major cities, where cars are much more necessary, especially since Macron continued budget cuts that shuttered many train stations. Schools, hospitals, courthouses, and other bureaucratic buildings were also closed, meaning people had to drive even further to go about their business.
I have to drive 60 kilometers a day. I can't do it anymore.
Camus told me the government feels distant to the rural French. The only connection is when they pay taxes, but increasingly, because of these reductions in government services, it feels like nothing is given back in return. And keep in mind, these are parts of the country that have been hit hard by forces like globalization. Factories have closed, jobs have disappeared. Moving to a big city for a better life is all but impossible because of skyrocketing real estate prices. Camus compared the downtrodden situation in France's rural areas to the Rust Belt in the United States. So, with all this resentment brewing, in November 2018, a movement to oppose the gas tax increase was born. That's the Yellow Vests. Yellow Vest is both a fitting name and a convenient uniform. Every car owner has to have one by law in case of a breakdown, and it symbolizes an emergency. The protesters think there's an emergency of bad governance in the country. As has been the case with many other recent protest movements across the world, it's been mostly organized on social media. A petition circulated on Facebook sort of set things off. Now, at first, the Yellow Vests congregated in traffic circles in rural areas. On November 17th, nearly 300,000 protesters blocked roads in some 2,000 locations across the country. In the following weeks, the action centered around Paris, where pockets of vandalism and violence erupted. Lawless youths, or breakers, mixed with the Yellow Vest to sow havoc. The scene had all the trappings of somewhat out-of-control civil disobedience. Cars on fire, smashed windows, rocks thrown at police in riot gear, tear gas, arrests, etc. Many of the Parisian businesses vandalized were the types of upscale stores that the Yellow Vests would never be able to afford, a fitting piece of symbolism.
Stop, please, I work here. Don't worry, the insurance will cover it. But I work here. Well, you have the means to work here. Come work in the south of France.
As a side note, a lot of these businesses were forced to close during the very important Christmas season. The French Retail Federation estimates the protests have cost the economy 2 billion euros in lost retail sales. The surprising winner of this development is Amazon. 1 in 5 French people said they were ordering online this holiday season for safety reasons. Anyway, I digress. When all this wild shit went down in Paris, the movement was finally able to get Macron's attention, a fact that seemed to underscore the feeling that people in the provinces are ignored, but when shit goes down in a big city, it gets taken seriously. After a few weeks of chaos, Macron gave an address to the nation. He sort of acknowledged that he's out of touch, noting that his words had hurt people. He pledged to end the gas tax hike. In addition, he promised to supplement the minimum wage, and he rescinded a tax on some pensioners. Importantly, he did not reinstate the wealth tax, an issue that had become more and more important to the Yellow Vests and their sense of imbalance and injustice in the country. So the protesters were pretty much unimpressed. The demonstrations continued. They are, in fact, still continuing. Macron seems to be running out of patience. Far from the conciliatory tone he struck in December, he got a little tough in his New Year's speech, saying he would restore order without compromise. Goldhammer told me this speech invoked a strong French leader of yesteryear, Charles de Gaulle. Like de Gaulle often did, Macron stood for this address. He didn't sit down behind a desk like last year, and he used forceful hand motions, another de Gaulle idiosyncrasy. Whatever the choreography and whom it alluded to, it didn't seem to work. In the first weekend of 2019, in another Yellow Vest protest, a minister was chased out of a government building by a crowd that had commandeered a forklift. On the same day, in a fairly insane viral video, a boxer tried to engage riot police in hand-to-hand combat. Camus told me the protest is now targeting the very frame of French democracy. The whole system is under attack. Many of the Yellow Vests want Macron to resign. This is all a remarkable turn of events. Macron's approval rating was at 64% after he was elected. Just over a year and a half later, it's in the 20s, something Macron frenemy Donald Trump gleefully pointed out on Twitter. Now, the media frame around Macron's drastic decline in support is that it came out of nowhere. But Garrett Martin, professorial lecturer at American University's School of International Service, told that Macron's popularity was never that deep. His big victory in the presidential election had to do with the shortcomings of his opponents, particularly right-wing provocateur Marine Le Pen, who he faced in the second and final round of the election. In fact, polls show that far less than half of Macron's voters selected him out of conviction. Martin also pointed out that since Macron was a newcomer, voters didn't have the type of history with him that breeds durable trust. Maybe they were initially warm towards the newcomer, but that doesn't always translate into a committed relationship. So when his policies seem to be more of the same, that is, a mix of business-friendly deregulation and austerity for the little guy, they were quick to turn on him. It's unclear where this goes from here. One of the remarkable things about the Yellow Vest movement is that it's pretty apolitical. No politicians or party have been able to co-opt it, partly because all elites are resented in France. And for what it's worth, it's very unlikely that Macron resigns. He still has several years left in office. He still has that majority in parliament. Martin told me he might be reluctant to pursue other agenda items going forward, like a reform to the pension system, but he's still controlling all the levers of power. Besides, as mentioned earlier, protests in France aren't that unusual. Hell, there was recently another movement that was named after a colorful accessory and which targeted a transportation tax. That's the red caps. So perhaps Macron shouldn't feel singled out. However, his stature in Europe has clearly diminished. Macron positioned himself as a savior of the European Union, as nationalism swept across the bloc, as democracy declined in places like Hungary, as Brexit threatened to throw economic arrangements into disarray. Macron was supposed to be the bold, charismatic leader who kept everyone together, the potential successor to German Chancellor Angela Merkel, the EU power broker who was set to leave office. But now, forget about the EU, Macron can't even keep it together at home, which begs the question, as Europe deals with one crisis after another, who's going to lead?